Have you ever looked up at the red dot in the night sky and thought, what if we lived there? Mars is the mysterious red planet. For centuries, we've imagined Martians. For decades, we've dreamed of going there. And today, we ask, what if we actually lived on Mars? This isn't just science fiction anymore. NASA, SpaceX, and scientists around the world are taking real steps toward making Mars our second home. But living there wouldn't just be about planting a flag. It would be about surviving, adapting, and creating a new chapter for humanity, 240 million kilometers from home. Here's what we need to know about life on Mars. First, the basics. Mars is a cold, dry planet with a thin atmosphere. It has two moons, Phobos and Deimos, and its days are about 40 minutes longer than Earth's. A year on Mars is almost twice as long as Earth's, with 6 months each of summer, fall, winter, and spring. And although Mars is red, it's not actually the color of the planet. It's just the color of the dust that covers it. Want to know more about life on Mars? Stay tuned for more updates. If the thought of traveling to other planets seems like science fiction, don't worry. You're not alone. For most of human history, space was just something we looked up at. But now it's within our reach, sort of. Let's take a look at what it would really take for us to visit the red planet, Mars. The journey to Mars. Let's begin with the trip itself. Mars is, on average, 225 million kilometers away. Depending on planetary alignment, a one-way trip takes 6 to 9 months. That's half a year in a spaceship the size of a school bus with recycled air, limited gravity, and zero Uber Eats deliveries. The spacecraft would have to carry everything that the astronauts need to survive that journey, including fuel, food, and water. It'll be equipped with solar panels to generate electricity and propulsion systems to navigate space. But what about communication? How could astronauts possibly communicate with Earth when they're so far away? Well, according to NASA, radio signals travel at the speed of light, which is about 300,000 kilometers per second. But there's a catch. Radio waves can't travel through the vacuum of space. They need a medium like our atmosphere to bounce off of in order to reach their destination. So as the solar system's rovers get farther and farther away from home base, their ability to communicate with Earth will become increasingly difficult. And at its farthest point, the signal can take up to 22 minutes to make the round trip. That means if the astronauts needed help, they couldn't count on getting it right away. Any mission to Mars would need to account for this reality. The astronauts would have to be self-sufficient and prepared to deal with any problems that come up while they in transit. This would require careful planning and a lot of patience, but it's also an exciting prospect. Think about how amazing it would feel to be so far away from Earth with only the stars for company. The sense of adventure and wonder would be unlike anything we've ever experienced before. Of course, there would also be challenges along the way, but the sense of accomplishment that comes with exploring the unknown would be worth it. Landing on Mars. When the solar system arrives at Mars, it will have to slow down from its high speed and land safely on the planet's surface. To do this, the spacecraft would use a combination of parachutes and rockets to bring it to a stop. Once on the ground, the astronauts would have to deploy their habitats, which would serve as their home base during their stay on Mars. These habitats would need to be able to withstand the harsh environment of the planet, including its thin atmosphere, low gravity, and constant dust storms. But despite these challenges, the rewards of exploring Mars would be great. The planet has been shaped by volcanic activity, wind erosion, and the impact of meteoroids. Its surface is full of craters, canyons, and other features that provide clues to its past. By studying Mars, we can learn more about the history of our own planet and the evolution of life in the universe. We may also find evidence of past or present life on Mars, which would be a groundbreaking discovery. The planet's surface is covered in a red-brown dust that gives it its distinctive color. This dust is made up of iron oxide, which is also responsible for the rust color of old cars and other metal objects. The color of Mars has led to it being nicknamed the Red Planet. Despite its color, Mars is actually a pretty cool place. Its average surface temperature about minus 63 degrees Celsius. That's because Mars is much farther away from the sun than Earth is. As a result, the planet's atmosphere is very thin and can't trap much heat. The atmosphere of Mars is mostly made up of carbon dioxide with only small amounts of nitrogen and oxygen. This means that humans would not be able to breathe on Mars without a spacesuit. In addition to the thin atmosphere, Mars also has very low gravity. If you weigh 100 pounds on Earth, you would only weigh about 38 pounds on Mars. This means that it would be easy to move around on the planet, but it also makes landing a spacecraft more difficult. Despite these challenges, Mars is still a very attractive destination for human explorers. With careful planning and preparation, it is possible that one day we will all be able to experience the thrill of visiting the red planet for ourselves. Life on Mars. Okay, so you survived the journey to Mars. Now what does life on Mars actually look like? Well, first things first, you won't be able to walk around outside without a spacesuit. The atmosphere on Mars is too thin and the radiation levels are too high. So that means you'll be spending most of your time inside your habitat. Habitats would be designed to simulate the conditions on Earth as much as possible. They would have artificial gravity, an atmosphere that humans could breathe, and plenty of room to move around. There would also be lots of rules to follow in order to keep everyone safe. For example, you wouldn't be allowed to go outside without a spacesuit. And you would have to be very careful when handling equipment in order to avoid damaging it. Life on Mars would be a team effort. Everyone would have to work together in order to make the mission a success. There would be lots of tasks to complete, such as conducting experiments, exploring the surface, and repairing equipment. So everyone's help would be needed, but it wouldn't be all work and no play. There would be time for fun too. The astronauts could play games, watch movies, and even exercise. After all, they would be living in a habitat for many months, if not years. So it's important that they would be comfortable there. The astronauts would also have the opportunity to explore the surface of Mars, although they would have to do so in a rover. The thin atmosphere and low gravity make it impossible for humans to walk on Mars, but the astronauts could see the famous Olympus Mons, which is the tallest mountain in the solar system. They could also explore the Valles Marineris Canyon, which is one of the largest canyons in the solar system. There would be a lot to see on Mars, and the astronauts would be able to make some amazing discoveries. Overall, life on Mars would be challenging, but it would also be an incredible experience. The astronauts would get to explore a new planet, make groundbreaking discoveries, and maybe even find life beyond Earth. It would be an adventure of a lifetime. Return trip. Unfortunately, the return trip would also mean saying goodbye to some of the comforts of home, at least as we know them. Forget about your car, your house, and your favorite restaurant. Instead, you'll be living in a cramped spaceship for months on end. You'll have to say goodbye to fresh food and comfortable beds. But you'll also need to be prepared for the unexpected. There's no such thing as a typical day in space. One minute you could be making repairs and the next you could be taking part in a scientific experiment. Space travel is unpredictable and exciting. The return trip would be an emotional roller coaster. On the one hand, you'd be returning home after months away. On the other hand, you'd be leaving behind a part of yourself that had grown on Mars. It would be a bittersweet moment, but ultimately the return trip would be an incredible experience. You would have seen and done things that few others can claim to have done. You would have explored a new planet, conducted groundbreaking research, and maybe even found life beyond Earth. You would have lived a truly unique and exciting life, and you would never forget it. Is it worth it? So what would it take for you to leave Earth and never return? Would you brave the months-long journey in a cramped spacecraft knowing that you might never see your home planet again? Or would you prefer to stay on Earth, where you can walk on grass, breathe fresh air, and hug your loved ones goodbye? Traveling to Mars would undoubtedly be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. The journey itself would be a test of endurance, and the challenges of living on a new planet would be daunting. However, the rewards would be immeasurable. The chance to explore an entirely new world, conduct groundbreaking research, and maybe even find life beyond Earth would be an incredible opportunity. It would also be a chance to push the boundaries of human exploration and discovery. For centuries, humans have dreamed of going to other planets, and now it's within our reach. With careful planning and execution, a trip to Mars could be both safe and successful. While there would undoubtedly be challenges along the way, the sense of wonder and adventure would make it all worthwhile. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not to go to Mars is a personal one. There's no right or wrong answer. But one thing is for sure, the journey would be an experience like no other. If you liked the video, then please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. And if you didn't like it, well, you can always leave a comment below telling us why. So you want to live on Mars? Congratulations! You've picked the hottest, or should I say coldest, planet in the solar system. But don't worry, we're here to help. We'll show you how to turn Mars into a second home. Just follow these easy steps. Step 1. Build a Martian colony. No one wants to live in a tent forever, so your first order of business as a Martian colonist will be constructing permanent housing. And lucky for you, engineers are already hard at work on plans for future Mars missions that include 3D printing technology. This method would use Martian regolith, aka dirt, mixed with a binding agent such as a type of plastic to form bricks without a kill. All it needs is a 3D printer and a supply of the binding agent, which isn't exactly plentiful on Mars, but scientists have developed ways to make the necessary materials from methane found in the planet's atmosphere. Once the bricks are formed, they can be laid down in layers by the 3D printer to create walls, floors, and roofs. According to tests conducted by NASA in 2022, these structures could even withstand meteor impacts. Other options include inflatable modules made from durable materials that can expand to several stories once deployed. These might serve as temporary housing while colonists get settled, or they could become part of a sprawling underground complex. After all, an entire city could fit beneath just one of Mars's enormous dunes. Not that you'd actually see it, since sandstorms could last months. But still, hey, if you hate sunlight, you'd love living in a cave. And speaking of power, let's talk about step 2, keep it bright. Let's face it, Mars sucks when it comes to energy. Its atmosphere is thin, its days are cold and dark, and the sun is far more distant than it is on Earth. That means solar power is about twice as weak on the red planet. On top of that, Mars doesn't have much of an ozone layer to protect it from harmful radiation, which makes it harder for electronics to function properly. It's also incredibly difficult to bring fossil fuels to Mars because they're so heavy. So it's no surprise that every single plan to establish a Martian colony relies heavily on solar power. And luckily, new technologies are making it easier to harness the energy of the distant sun. For example, in 2021, NASA tested a new type of lightweight, flexible solar cell that could easily be transported to other planets and assembled on site. When fully extended, the cells would create a power source large enough to support multiple crew members during long space missions. One proposal for a Mars mission includes a giant orbiting solar power station. This idea is still very much in the discussion phase, but if built, it would provide nearly constant energy to the surface of Mars thanks to the planet's synchronous orbit. Some planets, including Earth, have what's called a synchronous orbit, where an object takes the same amount of time to orbit the planet as the planet takes to spin on its axis. This means that the object always stays above the same part of the planet, providing continuous illumination. This isn't possible on Mars because it takes the planet 687 Earth days to orbit the Sun and only 1 day to spin on its axis. But Mars does have 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos. Scientists think that Phobos, the larger of the two, is actually a captured asteroid. And due to its proximity to Mars, it's possible that Phobos shares a synchronous orbit with the planet. That means a solar power station orbiting Phobos could take advantage of the reflected sunlight to provide almost constant, renewable energy to our Martian colony. Now, this is a big project, but where there's a will, there's a way. Speaking of keeping things bright, let's move on to step 3, seek and ye shall scour. If you decide to leave the safety of your shelter, you won't find much in the way of natural beauty on Mars. However, there is a lot of frozen carbon dioxide scattered around the planet's surface. And if you can round up enough of it, you can turn it into dry ice slushy Martian cocktails. But you lines need to search high and low to find it because Mars is completely devoid of native plants and animals. That means no birds, no bees, and no adorable field mice for you to befriend. Luckily, robots are great at exploring desolate wastelands. So NASA has deployed a number of rovers and drones to scout out promising areas for future colonies. For example, the space agency's Mars helicopter robot Ingenuity has been exploring the red planet's surface since February 2021. In less than a year, it had already traveled 1 kilometer over Martian terrain, scouting potential routes for future missions. And Ingenuity isn't the only robotic explorer on Mars. NASA's Perseverance rover has been searching for signs of ancient life and collecting samples of rock and soil that will eventually be brought back to Earth. Perseverance also has a drone of its own, the Ingenuity Mars helicopter. Together, they form one of the most sophisticated robotic exploration systems ever deployed on another planet. And that's just what we're able to see. There are dozens of other missions exploring Mars right now that we don't know about. That's right, Mars is a popular destination for spacecraft. Since 1964, more than 50 missions have explored the red planet. Unfortunately, only 21 of them have been successful. The others either crashed, burned up in the atmosphere, or simply got lost in space. But the odds are good that your Martian colony will be well stocked with supplies thanks to NASA's Sample Return Program. It's a massive international project designed to bring Martian samples back to Earth. The first stage involves Perseverance and Ingenuity gathering rock and soil samples and storing them in sealed tubes deep within a crater. A fetch rover will then retrieve those samples and place them inside a special spacecraft. Finally, a rocket will blast off from Mars and carry the precious cargo back to Earth. Scientists hope to launch the first return mission in 2026 and bring the first Martian samples to Earth 3 years later. And who knows what treasures we'll find in those samples? Maybe fossils of prehistoric microbes or evidence that Mars was once teeming with life. Or maybe it will just be boring rocks and dirt. But hey, at least we'll have something to decorate our Martian homes with. Now, let's move on to step 4, breathe easy. Let's face it, Mars sucks when it comes to air, too. Its atmosphere is mostly made up of carbon dioxide with only trace amounts of oxygen. That means humans couldn't survive on the surface unless we created artificial environments to live in. Thankfully, we already know how to do that. Back in the 1960s, NASA developed a system called the Apollo Environmental Life Support System, or ELSS, to sustain astronauts on the moon. It worked by recycling air, water, and waste products so they could be used over and over again. And although the moon and Mars are very different, the basic principles behind the ELSS could be applied to create a breathable atmosphere on the red planet. In fact, a recent feasibility study concluded that it would only take about 100 tons of plant life to supply oxygen for a crew of 10 people living on Mars for 1 year. Plants would remove carbon dioxide from the air and release oxygen through photosynthesis. So all you have to do is bring some seeds along and wait for them to grow. As for the rest of the atmosphere, well, it's going to take a little bit more work. You'll need a special machine called an oxygen concentrator to separate the oxygen from the carbon dioxide. Then you'll need to pressurize the air to prevent it from boiling in your lungs. Finally, you'll need to add a few other gases to keep the air from becoming stale. With all those steps combined, you'll be able to enjoy a comfortable, breathable atmosphere that feels just like home, sort of. And speaking of feeling like home, Let's move on to step 5, keeping your cool. If you've ever visited Alaska in the winter, you know that it can get pretty cold. Like really, really cold. Well, Mars is even colder. Average temperatures on the planet range from a chilly 63 degrees Celsius to a downright frigid minus 22 degrees Celsius. That's why it's so important to keep your base nice and toasty. And you don't need to worry about heating your entire settlement. After all, who's gonna find you if you're trapped in a snow globe? By controlling the temperature inside your habitat, you lines also be able to maintain the right amount of pressure and ensure that water remains liquid instead of freezing solid. Of course, you'll need to recycle it over and over again, but you can always bring some fun toys along to keep yourself entertained. In conclusion, building a colony on Mars will take a lot of work. But with careful planning and execution, it can be done. In fact, we've already developed many of the technologies needed to create a sustainable human presence on the red planet. All we need now is the political will and financial resources to carry it out. So if you're tired of living on Earth and you're looking for a new adventure, Mars might just be the place for you. Just pack your bags and get ready for the adventure of a lifetime. Hey, would you want to live on Mars? Tell us in the comments. When you think of Mars, what comes to mind? Is it the rusty red dust storms, the barren rocky landscape, or maybe Elon Musk tweeting about colonizing it? Regardless of your opinion about the planet, one thing is for sure, it's been a long time fascination for humans. And now it seems like it's finally within our reach. So let's say you decide to move to Mars. What could a day in your life look like? Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to explore what a typical day looks like for a human living on Mars. If that sounds exciting to you, hit the subscribe button. Without further ado, let's get into today's video. 7 a.m. Mars time, alarm goes off. You open your eyes and realize it's another beautiful Martian morning. At least that's what you would see if you weren't in an underground dome. As you take in the sights, you realize you have a lot to do today. So you jump out of bed in your personal capsule. The reason why all the residents sleep in individual capsules is to save space and allow more room for communal areas. It's also a lot more comfortable than it sounds. Each capsule has its own temperature control, lighting, and soundproofing. In fact, it's probably the most restful sleep you've ever had, but unfortunately, it's time to get up. After making your bed, you head to the bathroom to get ready for the day. While brushing your teeth, you notice something strange. Your toothbrush doesn't seem to be working. After a moment of panic, you realize that you forgot to switch the gravity setting back to normal after brushing your teeth. You float towards the kitchen, bumping into a few objects along the way. You really have to get used to this whole zero-gravity thing. As you enter the kitchen, you notice that breakfast is already ready. Today's special is algae pancakes and lab-grown meat. Yummy! Well, maybe not so much the algae pancakes, but the meat at least makes it a little more appetizing. Luckily, you don't have to wait long before you can dig in because one of the residents is kind enough to turn off the ambient noise. When it's quiet, you can finally enjoy your meal. After breakfast, you head out to check on the crops. Since food is scarce on Mars, farming is a crucial part of life there. Fortunately, thanks to modern technology, you can grow almost anything you want with a little bit of effort. That being said, it's hard work and requires constant monitoring. After checking on the crops, you head back indoors for some R&R. You flip on the TV and catch up on some Martian news. Most of it is pretty much the same old stuff. Reports on crop yields, weather updates, reminders to wear sunscreen, and so on. There is one interesting story, though. A group of researchers has discovered evidence of ancient water on Mars. They believe that the planet was once much warmer and wetter than it is now. Who knows? Maybe in a few years we'll find out that we're not alone on this planet. The possibilities are endless. Speaking of which, it's time for your shift at work. You're currently employed as a potato farmer, one of the most important jobs on Mars. Your responsibility is to monitor the growth of the crops and make sure they're free of pests. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. After all, potatoes are the main source of food for the colony. So they've got to thrive. You work alongside other farmers to maintain the fields. One of your colleagues is a transfer student from Earth, while another is a native Martian born and raised on the red planet. Together, you make sure that the crops stay healthy and the colony is fed. After your shift, you meet up with some friends for a quick game of Martian chess. The rules are the same as regular chess, except that you can only move one square at a time. It might seem boring, but it's actually a lot more strategic than it looks. You play until dinner, then head back home. Once there, you take a shower, change into some comfy clothes, and settle in for a night of virtual reality gaming. One of the best things about living on Mars is having access to the best VR technology. The immersion is unlike anything you've ever experienced. You can visit exotic planets, fight off hordes of aliens, and explore the vastness of space all from the comfort of your own home. After a few hours of gaming, you head to bed. Before you know it, it's 7 a.m. Mars time again and another beautiful Martian morning. As you get ready for the day, you reflect on your life on Mars. It has been an incredible journey so far, and you can't wait to see what the future brings. This was just one possible version of a typical day on Mars. Of course, everyone's experience will be different depending on their occupation, location, and personal interests. For example, if you worked in construction, your days would be filled with building and repairing structures on the planet's surface. Or if you were a geologist, you would spend your time exploring Mars's rocks and soil to learn more about its history. And if you lived closer to the equator, your days would be longer and hotter than those at the poles. No matter what your experience may be, one thing is for sure: every day on Mars is an adventure. Mars is a dynamic and challenging planet that offers endless opportunities for exploration and discovery. The planet's surface is constantly changing due to volcanic activity, meteor impacts, and the erosion of its thin atmosphere. This means that no 2 days on Mars are the same, and there is always something new to discover. Additionally, the planet's thin atmosphere and lack of a global magnetic field mean that Mars is bombarded by cosmic radiation, creating a harsh environment for humans to live in. This makes it essential for those living on Mars to take precautions, such as wearing protective clothing and limiting their exposure to the elements. Despite these challenges, Mars is a truly awe-inspiring planet that offers unparalleled opportunities for exploration and discovery. From its towering Olympus mountains to its vast canyons and craters, Mars is a planet that will continue to captivate humanity for centuries to come. Whether you're an astronaut on a research mission or simply someone who dreams of exploring the red planet, one thing is for sure: a day in the life of a human on Mars is never boring. Do you want to know more about the life on Mars? Check out our videos on what humans will look like on Mars. Thank you for watching today's video. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified of new videos. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up. That would be appreciated. See you next time. Martian Culture. The first human settlement on Mars will be named New Eden. The dome itself will be a bustling hub of activity. Inside it, a mini-city will grow, complete with hydroponic farms, industrial centers, and residential quarters. And as generations are born and live out their lives under the dome, a new culture would form. Over several centuries, that culture would produce new slang, new traditions, holidays like Landing Day or Water Discovery Week, fashion, utilitarian suits with flair, music made using synthesized air instruments, art painted with Martian dust, and maybe even Martian cuisine, spiced fungi noodles, seaweed cookies, or beetroot smoothies grown in biopods. To understand what a multi-generational colony on Mars might be like, we can look at a few current analogs here on Earth. One is the US Antarctic program. Every year since 1957, researchers have spent months at a time at the South Pole to study the environment and conduct experiments. Each year, about 200 researchers from around the world arrive at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, and they spend anywhere from 2 months to a year living inside. During that time, They have to work together to accomplish their research goals, and they form a close community. When they're not working, there's not much else to do because the outside temperature averages about 60 degrees Celsius, so they have to rely on each other for entertainment too. This means that the people in Antarctica often form close bonds with their fellow researchers that last long after they return home. In fact, there is even a tradition called leaving gifts, where people write messages on the walls of the station with special non-toxic paint. It's kind of like when you were younger and you wrote your name in a bathroom stall, except instead of leaving a silly message for the next person who comes along, you're leaving a message for the next person who comes along. It's a small way of connecting with others who share a common experience. It's a way of saying, I was here and this is my story, and this is something that will likely happen on Mars as well. As people come and go from the red planet, they will leave their mark on the domes and cities that they inhabited. Another great analog for understanding what a multi-generational colony on Mars might be like is Biosphere 2. From 1991 to 2011, for groups of 8 people lived inside Biosphere 2 in the Arizona desert. They had to grow their own food, recycle their own water, and generate their own power. They were essentially creating a self-sustaining ecosystem. These people weren't just scientists and researchers. They were everyday people from all walks of life. But they were willing to live in an isolated environment and cut off from the rest of the world to see what it was like. And over time, they developed their own culture. They had their own language, customs, and traditions. Now, Biosphere 2 wasn't without its problems. The crew had to deal with pests, crop failures, and interpersonal conflicts. But they also learned a lot about how to live sustainably and in harmony with nature. And in the end, they emerged with a new perspective on life and the importance of community. Now, of course, there is one really big difference between these analogs and a real Martian colony. We're not talking about a group of people who are just visiting Mars for a few months or a group of volunteers who are living in a simulated Martian environment. We're talking about a group of people who are actually living on Mars. This is going to be a huge challenge, and there are so many things that could go wrong. But if we can pull it off, it would be one of the greatest achievements in human history. As we settle into our new homes on Mars, we will begin to explore our new surroundings. The surface of Mars is full of wonders, and we will spend many years just discovering what is out there. Eventually, though, we will start to venture further and further away from the dome. And when we do, we will need to be prepared for anything. That is why it is important to develop a strong sense of community and to create a culture that values cooperation and resilience. A culture that has developed in Antarctica has been able to withstand the harsh conditions and the isolation of the South Pole. By learning from these cultures, we can create a culture that is strong enough to survive on Mars. As more and more people make their way to Mars and begin exploring the planet, we will start to find new and interesting things. We might find evidence of past life, or we might find resources that can help us sustain ourselves on the planet. As we make these discoveries, we will want to share them with the people back home. And that's where communication becomes really important. Developing a culture that values sharing and openness will be essential for our success on Mars. If we can communicate effectively with each other and with the people back home, we can learn from each other and grow as a species. One way we might be able to do this is by developing new technologies that allow us to communicate more easily across the vast distances of space. Another thing we need to keep in mind as we develop a culture on Mars is the importance of respecting the planet itself. Mars is a beautiful and unique planet, and we need to make sure that we don't damage it as we explore it. That means being careful not to pollute and being mindful of the impact that our presence is having on the planet. One way we can do this is by developing a culture that values sustainability and environmental responsibility. If we can learn to live in harmony with the Martian environment, we will be able to enjoy the beauty of the planet for generations to come. As we continue to explore Mars, we will no doubt encounter challenges that we never imagined. But if we can develop a culture that is strong, resilient, and sustainable, we will be able to overcome any obstacle. We will be able to build a new home on Mars and create a new chapter in the story of humanity. So as we prepare to make our first human settlements on Mars, let us keep these things in mind. Let us strive to create a culture that will help us thrive on the red planet. A culture that is open, inclusive, and respectful of the environment. If we can do that, we will be able to build a new home for humanity on Mars. If you liked this video, check out another recent video we put out about a day in the life of an astronaut on Mars. We think you'll like it. Thanks for watching. Dangers and psychological strife. So life on Mars sounds pretty great. You'll get to live in an alien world, conduct groundbreaking science experiments, build the first Martian colony, and maybe even save humanity while you're at it. Okay, maybe it's not all that great. Living on Mars will come with some serious downsides, from radiation exposure and toxic soil to running out of air and having no cell service. And one of the biggest challenges of all, according to experts, might just be boredom. But let's not forget the risks: boredom, isolation, anxiety, depression. These aren't sci-fi problems, they're real for astronauts already. So what does this mean for Mars? In other words, how screwed are we if we try to live there? A tiny leak in your habitat, catastrophic, equipment failure? Potentially life-threatening, any emergency means help is months away. Even basic dental problems could become big deals. So psychology, AI companions, and constant monitoring would be essential for anyone who wants to survive a mission to Mars. Here's why. You can't call Superman. When NASA astronaut Scott Kelly returned to Earth after a year in space, he was greeted by a hero's welcome, a giant banner reading "Welcome Home," Scott, and dozens of well-wishers cheering him on. But for all the congratulations, his family had some less joyous things to say. His wife said she was worried that his year in space had taken a toll on his mental health. His 2 kids were excited to see him, but also had no idea what it meant that their dad had been gone for so long. Kelly himself felt very disoriented and struggled to deal with the aftermath of his experience. He couldn't quite relax or trust that his body knew what to do. He often felt like a stranger in his own skin. It wasn't until 3 months after he got back to Earth that he really started feeling like himself again. That's because living in outer space doesn't just take a toll on the mind, it can change your whole body. For example, when you live in zero gravity, your bones and muscles start to break down because they do and need to work as hard to keep you upright. Your cardiovascular system doesn't have to pump blood against gravity, so it becomes weaker. The fluid in your body redistributes itself, making you puff up. All these changes allow your body to adapt to its environment, but they're not necessarily good for your mental health. According to Kelly, it can be hard to feel connected to Earth when you're more than 200 miles above it. You lose a sense of time and place, and sometimes that can lead to depression, anxiety, and other psychological issues. Kelly was lucky because he could call home regularly during his 340-day mission aboard the International Space Station. But the first crewed missions to Mars won't be able to rely on that communication lifeline. The round trip would take more than 2 years, and the messages would be delayed to be conversational. And that's a problem because maintaining those connections back home is vital for astronauts' mental health, especially considering that even if everything goes right, living on Mars will be incredibly lonely. Currently, the ISS has a crew of about 7 people, although that number fluctuates as astronauts finish their assignments and head back to Earth. The first Martian colony would likely only have between 4 and 6 members. And remember, those people will have left Earth knowing they won't be seeing their loved ones for years. Of course, that's all hypothetical because no one has ever lived on Mars before. But based on our experiences with long-duration space travel, researchers predict that isolation will be one of the biggest obstacles to overcome for any future Martian settlers. To make matters worse, according to a study published in the journal Acta Astronautica, those settlers will have almost no way to avoid each other. On Earth, You can escape a boring party or an annoying person by simply leaving. But when you're trapped on a planet with a handful of other people, your options are limited. On the bright side, though, the same research paper found that crews that train together tend to have better interpersonal dynamics when they are under extreme stress. So picking the right crew for your mission could mean the difference between success and failure. It's not all doom and gloom, though. Thanks to modern technology, we can probably create some awesome distractions for bored astronauts. Space.com reports that NASA is currently working on a virtual reality entertainment system for deep space missions. If the project goes well, it could be ready for use during the first human missions to Mars. Now, if you think this sounds like a cop-out, think again. Astronauts are already huge fans of VR. Not only is it a fun way to socialize with people back home, but it's also a great tool for training. Researchers can create simulations of dangerous spacewalks or complicated repairs and let astronauts practice them in the safety of their own habitat. These systems are so good that astronauts can practice operating rovers on simulated alien landscapes. And if all goes according to plan, that could mean that future crews won't just have VR as a way to pass the time, but will have a chance to test out their psychology and training as well. Now, here's the thing. We already know that the crew of the first Martian colony won't be able to access VR or any other fancy technology during their entire stay. This is to minimize the risk of equipment failure, which is a major concern for long-duration space travel. We don't know how reliable technology will be when it comes to sustaining humans on Mars, so it's best to play it safe and go with the basics. Food, water, shelter, air, power, waste management, life support, communications, navigation, and propulsion. According to a study by NASA, these are the top 10 things we'll need to sustain a human colony on Mars, and needless to say, it would be super helpful if we could develop backup systems for all of them. Because like we mentioned earlier, even something as simple as a leak in your habitat could turn into a catastrophic disaster. For example, if you've watched the movie The Martian, you might remember Matt Damon's character using a makeshift urine-based fertilizer. Well, that's actually not such a far-fetched idea. Experts believe that recycling human waste products like urine and sweat could be a valuable resource on Mars. Urine, for example, contains nitrogen and other chemicals that could be used to grow plants. Sweat, on the other hand, would be useful for hydration. And in general, being able to recycle resources will be key to keeping the colony alive. This is because sending supplies from Earth will be an extremely slow process. As cool as it would be to have resupply missions coming in frequently, that's simply not going to be an option. And growing food and generating power on site will be crucial for the survival of any crew. However, these activities will also take up a lot of energy and resources, which means the crew will need to be carefully monitored to make sure they don't run out of anything vital. And that's where AI or artificial intelligence comes in. There's a reason why NASA is always developing new robots for deep space exploration. They're not trying to replace astronauts anytime soon, but rather use robots to gather information and perform dangerous tasks autonomously. And the same will be true for colonies on Mars. Using AI to monitor colonists' health and manage resources will be essential. Take the Mars Dune Alpha mission, for example. This experiment takes place in a simulated Martian habitat in the Utah desert. One of the main goals of the mission is to explore how autonomous systems like rovers and mining machines could be used to help people on Mars. It's early days yet, but so far the results look promising. AI-powered systems may not be able to completely replace humans, but they can take on a lot of the grunt work so people can focus on the more important tasks like planting potatoes. All in all, life on Mars will come with some seriously big challenges. If all goes well, though, these problems will only become part of history. Humans will finally be able to step foot on another planet and call it home. Maybe we'll even befriend some friendly aliens along the way. Hey, a girl can dream, can't she? Now you know all about the dangers of living on Mars, but what about the benefits? Check out why should humans go to Mars, or watch this video instead. Terraforming in the far future. How much do you love your home planet? Do you appreciate its blue skies, flowing rivers, and all the oxygen it provides? Or do you just wish it was somewhere else like Mars? We've seen many science fiction movies about humans living on the red planet. Maybe one day we'll have colonies there. But Mars is pretty hostile to humans right now, so how could we change that? What would it take to turn Mars into Earth 2.0? Let's find out. Now back to our terraforming plans. Terraforming Mars will be difficult, but scientists say it is possible. In theory, this process can be broken down into 4 steps: heating the planet, releasing gases to thicken the atmosphere, removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and finally, putting oxygen into the atmosphere. It might seem complicated, but let's see how each step works. First, we need to warm up Mars. The average surface temperature of Mars is minus 63 degrees. To make the planet habitable for humans, we need to raise the average temperature to at least 0 degrees, and to do so, we'll need a lot of energy. Luckily, NASA says that it has already found evidence that Mars has huge deposits of methane hydrate, which is basically ice made of water and methane molecules. These hydrates are located near the surface of Mars and contain huge amounts of energy. If we use current technology, we can extract this energy by burning the methane hydrate and release heat into the atmosphere. NASA also believes that we can use giant mirrors to focus sunlight onto Mars. Each mirror will be about 700 feet wide, about the size of 20 American football fields. Scientists estimate that we will need about 1,000 mirrors to raise Mars' average surface temperature to 0 degrees. This will take a few hundred years, though. After that, Mars will still be very dry and windy, but more about that later. To make the planet more comfortable, we'll need to create an atmosphere similar to Earth's. Right now, the atmospheric pressure on Mars is only 1% of what we have here on Earth. So when we breathe in air on Mars, we're not getting enough oxygen. Also, Mars's atmosphere is mostly made of carbon dioxide. Only 0.13% of its atmosphere is oxygen. On Earth, the situation is reversed. Our atmosphere is 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. Now we know that Mars has some oxygen in its atmosphere, but to make it breathable for humans, we need to increase the oxygen concentration to at least 16%. As for the carbon dioxide, its pressure on Mars is about 65 times higher than on Earth. Too much CO2 in the atmosphere can cause global warming and even make it impossible for humans to breathe. So the next step will be to remove some of the carbon dioxide from Mars's atmosphere. And to do that, we'll need liquid oxygen and liquid nitrogen. Okay, but where are we going to get all this oxygen and nitrogen? Here's the thing, both Earth and Mars have a lot of frozen carbon dioxide at their poles. And if we heat these deposits up, then carbon dioxide will sublimate and become gas. On Mars, there are also some water ice deposits. But don't worry, they won't melt because Mars is cold enough. Water will simply sublimate like carbon dioxide. So we'll end up with a lot of CO2 and water vapor. Now here's where things get interesting. CO2 and water vapor can react with each other and form carbon monoxide and oxygen. The reaction goes like this: CO2 plus H2O equals CO plus O2. With enough time, all the CO2 in Mars's atmosphere will react with water and turn into oxygen. By the way, some scientists think that Mars may have had an ocean in the past. There are also river valleys and lake basins. So it's likely that we can find water ice on the planet's surface. But what about nitrogen? It makes up about 78% of Earth's atmosphere. And on Mars, there isn't any. Well, we'll need to get it from our good old Earth. And to do that, we'll use some powerful magnets. See, the Earth's atmosphere is surrounded by a magnetic field that protects us from solar wind. But Mars doesn't have a magnetic field, and that means that the solar wind can easily strip away its atmosphere. So to protect Mars, we'll need to put a giant magnet into space. It will keep the atmosphere intact, and prevent it from escaping. But how can we do that? Well, some scientists suggest placing powerful superconducting magnets in orbit around Mars. They'll create a magnetic field that will cover the entire planet. It'll be kind of like Earth's magnetic field, only artificial. So far, we've covered all the major steps of terraforming. And after a few thousand years, Mars will become much warmer, wetter, and more hospitable to life. But what about the oxygen? Remember, the goal is to raise its concentration to at least 16%. Well, it turns out that even without additional measures, Mars will become much more breathable. It'll take some 1,000 years, though, for the oxygen content in the atmosphere to reach 10%. But why does it take so long? The thing is, although the reaction between CO2 and water forms oxygen, the latter quickly reacts with rocks and soil and becomes unavailable for breathing. But there's no need to worry. Scientists believe that over time, oxygen will accumulate in Mars's atmosphere, and its concentration will reach 16. We've already talked about how we can heat up Mars, but once we start mining methane hydrate, we'll also release a lot of methane gas into the atmosphere. Methane is a greenhouse gas and it will help retain heat and warm up the planet. But don't worry, we won't have another runaway greenhouse effect like on Venus. We'll stop the process at the right moment. Mars will be cozy and warm like Earth. In theory, after all this, we'll be able to grow plants on Mars. At first, we'll need to import seeds and bacteria from Earth to kickstart the process. And only after that, we'll be able to grow trees and green Mars. Some scientists believe that the trees on Mars will look different from those on Earth. They'll probably have several trunks and grow in a dome shape. This will help them survive strong winds, and speaking of winds, they'll be the biggest challenge on our path to terraforming. Mars has almost no liquid water and no protection from the solar wind. That means that the planet is constantly bombarded with high-energy particles. These particles knock off a lot of hydrogen atoms from the soil and water. And since there's practically no gravity holding these hydrogen atoms to the planet, they just escape into space. And when the solar wind hits Mars's surface, it also knocks off a lot of dust. All this dust forms giant storms that can last for years. Just imagine trying to build a house during a Martian dust storm. You wouldn't be able to see anything. Another problem is radiation. Mars doesn't have a magnetic field and ozone layer like Earth, so cosmic rays and X-rays constantly bombard its surface. In such conditions, people would quickly get radiation sickness and die. So before we send people to Mars, we'll need to figure out how to protect them from radiation and strong winds. Perhaps we can use the materials that we mine on Mars itself. For example, regolith, which is the red Martian soil, contains perchlorates that can absorb radiation. If we mix the regolith with cement and other ingredients, we can make bricks that'll protect buildings from cosmic radiation. As for the storms, the only solution here seems to be artificial magnetic fields. What do you think? Is it worth changing Mars? Let us know in the comments. You've heard it all before, the planet Mars, a world of fire and ice where the Norse god of thunder once fought an epic battle against the giants. Okay, that last part's not true, but everything else is pretty much on the table when it comes to Mars. The Romans named it after their god of war, and it's been associated with courage, strength, and bloodlust ever since. But what if we flip the script? What if instead of Mars being a planet of war, it became the planet of peace? What if we made it our new home? So let us talk about what it would take to make that happen and if it is even possible. First things first, let's talk about the obvious. Living on Mars would be hard, like really hard. We're talking living in a low-pressure, low-gravity environment where temperatures can reach as high as 30 degrees Celsius or as low as -140. There is also the small matter of it being 225 million kilometers from the sun, which means we'd have to deal with months without daylight during the winter. And that's just the start. There are radiation concerns, toxic soil, the psychological toll of living in a tiny pressurized bubble. You know, the usual stuff that keeps us from populating the red planet. But let's assume we can solve all those problems. What would life actually look like on a terraformed Mars? Well, here's the thing, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. Some people would love the lower gravity, while others would hate not being able to walk around without a spacesuit. Some would thrive in the colder climate, while others would miss the warmth of the sun on their skin. Mars is a blank slate for a new beginning, a chance to build a society from scratch without the baggage of the past. Imagine a world without poverty, hunger, or war, where everyone has the opportunity to start fresh and build a better future. It sounds like a pipe dream, but it's not impossible. In fact, it's already happening. We're in the process of building a city on Mars right now, piece by piece, rock by rock, with the goal of making it habitable for humans within the next 30 years. Sure, it'll be cramped at first, like a few hundred people living in a giant dome, but it's a start. And as more and more people move to Mars, we'll start to see the beginnings of a new society, one that's more sustainable, more equitable, and more peaceful than the one we have now. As time goes on, this new society will grow and change. New technologies will be developed to make life on Mars easier and more comfortable. The planet will be terraformed to be more Earth-like, with a thicker atmosphere, more water, and a warmer climate. The people who live on Mars will become a new species, one that's stronger, more resilient, and more adaptable because of the challenges they faced in building a civilization on a hostile planet. Of course, this is just one possible scenario. There are infinite ways that life on Mars could play out. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter what happens on Mars. The real value isn't in the planet itself, but in what we learn along the way. The challenges we face, the risks we take, and the sacrifices we make in the name of exploration and discovery are what make us human. It's not about whether or not we succeed, but about what we attempt and what we learn in the process. So yeah, living on Mars would be hard, dangerous, expensive, maybe even impossible. But it would also be one of humanity's greatest adventures, a chance to push our limits and explore the unknown. It's a challenge, an opportunity, and a test. And if we're up for it, Mars might just be the next step in our story. But until then, let's take care of the world we already have. No matter how red the next planet is, Earth is still our only blue one. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, hit like and subscribe so you never miss an upload. This is our channel. We'll see you next time.